Part 1, Chapter 1 of The Idiot. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Eva M. Martin. Part 1, Chapter 1. Towards the end of November, during a thaw, at 9 o'clock one morning, a train on the Warsaw and Petersburg railway was approaching the latter city at full speed. The morning was so damp and misty that it was only with great difficulty that the day succeeded in breaking, and it was impossible to distinguish anything more than a few yards away from the carriage windows. Some of the passengers by this particular train were returning from abroad, but the third-class carriages were the best filled, chiefly with insignificant persons of various occupations and degrees, picked up at the different stations nearer town. All of them seemed weary, and most of them had sleepy eyes and a shivering expression, while their complexions generally appeared to have taken on the colour of the fog outside. When day dawned, two passengers in one of the third-class carriages found themselves opposite each other. Both were young fellows, both were rather poorly dressed, both had remarkable faces, and both were evidently anxious to start a conversation. If they had but known why, at this particular moment, they were both remarkable persons, they would undoubtedly have wondered at the strange chance which had set them down opposite to one another in a third-class carriage of the Warsaw Railway Company. One of them was a young fellow of about 27, not tall, with black curling hair and small grey fiery eyes. His nose was broad and flat, and he had high cheekbones. His thin lips were constantly compressed into an impudent, ironical, it might almost be called a malicious smile. But his forehead was high and well formed, and atoned for a good deal of the ugliness of the lower part of his face. A special feature of this physiognomy was its death-like pallor, which gave to the whole man an indescribably emaciated appearance, in spite of his hard look, and at the same time a sort of passionate and suffering expression, which did not harmonize with his impudent, sarcastic smile and keen, self-satisfied bearing. He wore a large fur, or rather Astrakhan, overcoat, which had kept him warm all night, while his neighbour had been obliged to bear the full severity of a Russian November night entirely unprepared. His wide sleeveless mantle with a large cape to it, the sort of cloak one sees upon travellers during the winter months in Switzerland or North Italy, was by no means adapted to the long cold journey through Russia, from Eydkuhnen to St. Petersburg. The wearer of this cloak was a young fellow also of about 26 or 27 years of age, slightly above the middle height, very fair, with a thin, pointed and very light-coloured beard. His eyes were large and blue, and had an intent look about them, yet that heavy expression, which some people affirm to be a peculiarity as well as evidence of an epileptic subject. His face was decidedly a pleasant one for all that, refined, but quite colourless, except for the circumstance that at this moment it was blue with cold. He held a bundle made up of an old faded silk handkerchief that apparently contained all his travelling wardrobe, and wore thick shoes and gaiters, his whole appearance being very un-Russian. His black-haired neighbour inspected these peculiarities, having nothing better to do, and at length remarked, with that rude enjoyment of the discomforts of others which the common classes so often show: "Cold?" "Very," said his neighbour readily, "and this is a thaw too. Fancy if it had been a hard frost! I never thought it would be so cold in the old country. I've grown quite out of the way of it." "What, been abroad, I suppose?" "Yes, straight from Switzerland." "Phew, my goodness!" The black-haired young fellow whistled and then laughed. The conversation proceeded. The readiness of the fair-haired young man in the cloak to answer all his opposite neighbour's questions was surprising. He seemed to have no suspicion of any impertinence or inappropriateness in the fact of such questions being put to him. Replying to them, he made known to the inquirer that he certainly had been long absent from Russia, more than 4 years, that he had been sent abroad for his health, that he had suffered from some strange nervous malady, a kind of epilepsy with convulsive spasms. His interlocutor burst out laughing several times at his answers, and more than ever when to the question whether he had been cured, the patient replied, "No, they did not cure me." "Ha, that's it! You stumped up your money for nothing, and we believe in those fellows here," remarked the black-haired individual sarcastically. "Gospel truth, sir, gospel truth!" exclaimed another passenger, a shabbily dressed man of about 40, who looked like a clerk, and possessed a red nose and a very blotchy face. "Gospel truth! All they do is get hold of our good Russian money, free, gratis, and for nothing." "Oh, but you're quite wrong in my particular instance," said the Swiss patient quietly. "Of course I can't argue the matter, because I know only my own case, but my doctor gave me money, and he had very little, to pay my journey back, besides having kept me at his own expense while there for nearly 2 years." "Why, was there no one else to pay for you?" asked the black-haired one. "No, Mr. Pavlicheff, who had been supporting me there, died a couple of years ago. I wrote to Mrs. General Yepanchin at the time. She is a distant relative of mine, but she did not answer my letter, and so eventually I came back." "And where have you come to?" "That is, where am I going to stay? I really don't quite know yet. Both the listeners laughed again. "I suppose your whole set-up is in that bundle, then?" asked the first. "I bet anything it is!" exclaimed the red-nosed passenger with extreme satisfaction, "and that he has precious little in the luggage van, though of course poverty is no crime, we must remember that." It appeared that it was indeed as they had surmised. The young fellow hastened to admit the fact with wonderful readiness. "Your bundle has some importance, however," continued the clerk when they had laughed their fill. It was observable that the subject of their mirth joined in the laughter when he saw them laughing. "For though I dare say it is not stuffed full of Friedrich d'Or and Louis d'Or, judge from your costume and gaiters, still, if you can add to your possessions such a valuable property as a relation like Mrs. General Yepanchin, then your bundle becomes a significant object at once. That is, of course, if you really are a relative of Mrs. Yepanchin's, and have not made a little error through, well, absence of mind, which is very common to human beings, or say through a too luxuriant fancy." "Oh, you are right again," said the fair-haired traveller, "for I really am almost wrong when I say she and I are related. She is hardly a relation at all. So little, in fact, that I was not in the least surprised to have no answer to my letter. I expected as much." You spent your postage for nothing, then?" You are candid, however, and that is commendable." "Mrs. Yepanchin? Oh yes, a most eminent person. I know her. As for Mr. Pavlicheff, who supported you in Switzerland, I know him too. At least, if it was the Nikolai Andreevitch of that name. A fine fellow he was, and had a property of 4,000 souls in his day." "Yes, Nikolai Andreevitch, that was his name," and the young fellow looked earnestly and with curiosity at the all-knowing gentleman with the red nose. This sort of character is met with pretty frequently in a certain class. They are people who know everyone. That is, they know where a man is employed, what his salary is, whom he knows, whom he married, what money his wife had, who are his cousins and second cousins, etc., etc. These men generally have about £100 a year to live on, and they spend their whole time and talents in the amassing of this style of knowledge, which they reduce, or raise, to the standard of a science. During the latter part of the conversation, the black-haired young man had become very impatient. He stared out of the window and fidgeted, and evidently longed for the end of the journey. He was very absent, he would appear to listen, and heard nothing, and he would laugh of a sudden, evidently with no idea of what he was laughing about. "Excuse me," said the red-nosed man to the young fellow with the bundle, rather suddenly. "Whom have I the honour to be talking to?" "Prince Lev Nikolayevich Myshkin," replied the latter, with perfect readiness. "Prince Myshkin? Lev Nikolayevich? I don't know, I'm sure. I may say I have never heard of such a person," said the clerk thoughtfully. "At least the name, I admit, is historical. Karamsin must mention the family name, of course, in his history. But as an individual, one never hears of any Prince Myshkin nowadays." "Of course not," replied the prince. "There are none except myself. I believe I am the last and only one. As to my forefathers, they have always been a poor lot. My own father was a sub-lieutenant in the army. I don't know how Mrs. Yepanchin comes into the Myshkin family, but she is descended from the Princess Myshkin, and she too is the last of her line." "And did you learn science and all that with your professor over there?" asked the black-haired passenger. "Oh yes, I did learn a little, but—" "I've never learned anything whatever," said the other. "Oh, but I learnt very little, you know," added the prince, as though excusing himself. "They could not teach me very much on account of my illness." "Do you know the Rogozhins?" asked his questioner abruptly. "No, I don't, not at all. I hardly know anyone in Russia. Why, is that your name?" "Yes, I am Rogozhin, Parfen Rogozhin." "Parfen Rogozhin? Dear me! Then don't you belong to those very Rogozhins, perhaps?" began the clerk, with a very perceptible increase of civility in his tone. "Yes, those very ones," interrupted Rogozhin impatiently and with scant courtesy. I may remark that he had not once taken any notice of the blotchy-faced passenger, and had hitherto addressed all his remarks direct to the prince. "Dear me, is it possible?" observed the clerk, while his face assumed an expression of great deference and servility, if not of absolute alarm. "What? A son of that very Semyon Rogozhin, hereditary honourable citizen, who died a month or so ago and left 2,5 millions of roubles." "And how do you know that he left 2,5 millions of roubles?" asked Rogozhin disdainfully, and not deigning so much as to look at the other. "However, it's true enough that my father died a month ago, and that here am I returning from Pskov a month after, with hardly a boot to my foot. They've treated me like a dog. I've been ill of fever at Pskov the whole time, and not a line nor farthing of money have I received from my mother or my confounded brother. And now you'll have 1,000,000 roubles at least, goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the clerk, rubbing his hands. "5 weeks since I was just like yourself," continued Rogozhin, addressing the prince, "with nothing but a bundle and the clothes I wore. I ran away from my father and came to Pskov, to my aunt's house, where I caved in at once with fever, and he went and died while I was away. All honour to my respected father's memory, but he uncommonly nearly killed me all the same. Give you my word, prince, if I hadn't cut and run then when I did, he'd have murdered me like a dog." "I suppose you angered him somehow?" asked the prince, looking at the millionaire with considerable curiosity. But though there may have been something remarkable in the fact that this man was heir to millions of roubles, There was something about him which surprised and interested the prince more than that. Rogozhin, too, seemed to have taken up the conversation with unusual alacrity. It appeared that he was still in a considerable state of excitement, if not absolutely feverish, and was in real need of someone to talk to, for the mere sake of talking, a safety valve to his agitation. As for his red-nosed neighbour, the latter, since the information as to the identity of Rogozhin hung over him, seemed to be living on the honey of his words and in the breath of his nostrils, catching at every syllable as though it were a pearl of great price. "Oh yes, I angered him. I certainly did anger him," replied Rogozhin. "But what puts me out so is my brother. Of course my mother couldn't do anything, she's too old. And whatever brother Shonka says is law for her. But why couldn't he let me know? He sent a telegram, they say. What's the good of a telegram? It frightened my aunt so that she sent it back to the office unopened, and there it's been ever since. It's only thanks to Koniev that I heard at all. He wrote me all about it. He says my brother cut off the gold tassels from my father's coffin at night, because they're worth a lot of money, says he. Why, I can get him sent off to Siberia for that alone if I like. It's sacrilege. Here, you, Scarecrow," he added, addressing the clerk at his side, "is it sacrilege or not, by law?" "Sacrilege, certainly. Certainly sacrilege," said the latter. "And it's Siberia for sacrilege, isn't it?" "Undoubtedly so. Siberia, of course." "They will think that I'm still ill," continued Rogozhin to the prince. "But I sloped off quietly, seedy as I was, took the train and came away. Ah, brother Shonka, you'll have to open your gates and let me in, my boy. I know he told tales about me to my father. I know that well enough. But I certainly did rile my father about Nastasya Filippovna. That's very sure. That was my own doing." "Nastasya Filippovna," said the clerk, as though trying to think out something. "Come, you know nothing about her," said Rogozhin impatiently. "And supposing I do know something," observed the other triumphantly. "Bosh! There are plenty of Nastasya Filippovnas. And what an impertinent beast you are," he added angrily. "I thought some creature like you would hang on to me as soon as I got hold of my money." "Oh, but I do know, as it happens," said the clerk in an aggravating manner. "Lebedeff knows all about her. You are pleased to reproach me, your excellency. But what if I prove that I am right after all? Nastasya Filippovna's family name is Barashkov. I know, you see, and she is a very well-known lady indeed, and comes of a good family too. She is connected with one Totsky, Afanasy Ivanovitch, a man of considerable property, a director of companies and so on, and a great friend of General Yepanchin, who is interested in the same matters as he is." "My eyes," said Rogozhin, really surprised at last. "The devil take the fellow! How does he know that?" "Why, he knows everything. Lebedeff knows everything. I was a month or two with Lihachof after his father died, your excellency, and while he was knocking about (he's in the debtor's prison now), I was with him, and he couldn't do a thing without Lebedeff. And I got to know Nastasya Filippovna and several people at that time." "Nastasya Filippovna? Why, you don't mean to say that she and Lihachof—" cried Rogozhin, turning quite pale. "No, nothing of the sort, I assure you," said Lebedeff hastily. "Oh dear no, not for the world. Totski's the only man with any chance there. Oh no. He takes her to his box at the opera at the French theatre of an evening, and the officers and people all look at her and say, 'By Jove, there's the famous Nastasya Filippovna.' But no one ever gets any further than that, for there is nothing more to say." "Yes, it's quite true," said Rogozhin, frowning gloomily. "So Zaleshoff told me. I was walking about the Nevsky one fine day, prince, in my father's old coat, when she suddenly came out of a shop and stepped into her carriage. I swear I was all of a blaze at once. Then I met Zaleshoff, looking like a hairdresser's assistant, got up as fine as I don't know who, while I looked like a tinker. 'Don't flatter yourself, my boy,' said he. 'She's not for such as you. She's a princess, she is, and her name is Nastasya Filippovna Barashkov, and she lives with Totski, who wishes to get rid of her because he's growing rather old, 55 or so, and wants to marry a certain beauty, the loveliest woman in all Petersburg.' And then he told me that I could see Nastasya Filippovna at the opera house that evening if I liked, and described which was her box. Well, I'd like to see my father allowing any of us to go to the theatre. He'd sooner have killed us any day. However, I went for an hour or so and saw Nastasya Filippovna, and I never slept a wink all night after. Next morning my father happened to give me 2 government loan bonds to sell, worth nearly 5,000 roubles each. 'Sell them,' said he, 'and then take 7,500 roubles to the office, give them to the cashier, and bring me back the rest of the 10,000, without looking in anywhere on the way. Look sharp, I shall be waiting for you.' Well, I sold the bonds, but I didn't take the 7,000 roubles to the office. I went straight to the English shop and chose a pair of earrings with a diamond the size of a nut in each. They cost 400 roubles more than I had, so I gave my name, and they trusted me. With the earrings I went at once to Zaleshoff's. 'Come on,' I said, 'come on to Nastasya Filippovna's.' And off we went without more ado. I tell you, I hadn't a notion of what was about me, or before me, or below my feet all the way. I saw nothing whatever. We went straight into her drawing-room, and then she came out to us. I didn't dare say right out who I was, but Zaleshoff said, 'From Parfen Rogozhin, in memory of his first meeting with you yesterday, be so kind as to accept these.' She opened the parcel, looked at the earrings, and laughed. 'Thank your friend Mr. Rogozhin for his kind attention,' says she, and bowed and went off. Why didn't I die there on the spot? The worst of it all, though, was that the beast Zaleshoff got all the credit of it. I was short and abominably dressed, and stood and stared in her face and never said a word, because I was shy, like an ass. And there was he all in the fashion, pomaded and dressed out, with a smart tie on, bowing and scraping. And I bet anything she took him for me all the while. 'Look here now,' I said when we came out, 'none of your interference here after this, do you understand?' He laughed. 'And how are you going to settle up with your father?' says he. I thought I might as well jump into the Neva at once without going home first. But it struck me that I wouldn't after all, and I went home feeling like one of the damned. 'My goodness!' shivered the clerk. 'And his father,' he added, for the prince's instruction, 'and his father would have given a man a ticket to the other world for 10 roubles any day, not to speak of 10,000. The prince observed Rogozhin with great curiosity. He seemed paler than ever at this moment. 'What do you know about it?' cried the latter. 'Well, my father learned the whole story at once, and Zaleshoff blabbed it all over the town besides. So he took me upstairs and locked me up, and swore at me for an hour. "This is only a foretaste," says he. "Wait a bit till night comes, and I'll come back and talk to you again." Well, what do you think? The old fellow went straight off to Nastasya Filippovna, touched the floor with his forehead, and began blubbering and beseeching her on his knees to give him back the diamonds. So after a while she brought the box and flew out at him. "There," she says, "take your earrings, you wretched old miser. although they are 10 times dearer than their value to me, now that I know what it must have cost Parfen to get them. Give Parfen my compliments," she says, "and thank him very much." Well, I meanwhile had borrowed 25 roubles from a friend, and off I went to Pskoff to my aunt's. The old woman there lectured me so that I left the house and went on a drinking tour round the public houses of the place. I was in a high fever when I got to Pskoff, and by nightfall I was lying delirious in the streets somewhere or other. "Oh, we'll make Nastasya Filippovna sing another song now," giggled Lebedeff, rubbing his hands with glee. "Hey, my boy, we'll get her some proper earrings now. We'll get her such earrings that—" "Look here," cried Rogozhin, seizing him fiercely by the arm. "Look here, if you so much as name Nastasya Filippovna again, I'll tan your hide as sure as you sit there." "Aha, do, by all means. If you tan my hide you won't turn me away from your society. You'll bind me to you, with your lash, forever. Ha, ha, ha! Here we are at the station, though." Sure enough, the train was just steaming in as he spoke. Though Rogozhin had declared that he left Pskoff secretly, a large collection of friends had assembled to greet him, and did so with profuse waving of hats and shouting. "Why, there's Zaleshoff here too," he muttered, gazing at the scene with a sort of triumphant but unpleasant smile. Then he suddenly turned to the prince. "Prince, I don't know why I've taken a fancy to you. Perhaps because I met you just when I did. But no, it can't be that, for I met this fellow," nodding at Lebedeff, "too, and I have not taken a fancy to him by any means. Come to see me, prince. We'll take off those gaiters of yours and dress you up in a smart fur coat, the best we can buy. You shall have a dress coat, best quality, white waistcoat, anything you like, and your pocket shall be full of money. Come, and you shall go with me to Nastasya Filippovna's. Now then, will you come or no?" "Accept, accept, Prince Lev Nikolayevich," said Lebedeff solemnly. "Don't let it slip. Accept, quick." Prince Myshkin rose and stretched out his hand courteously, while he replied with some cordiality, "I will come with the greatest pleasure, and thank you very much for taking a fancy to me. I dare say I may even come today if I have time, for I tell you frankly that I like you very much too. I liked you especially when you told us about the diamond earrings, but I liked you before that as well, though you have such a dark, clouded sort of face. Thanks very much for the offer of clothes and a fur coat. I shall certainly require both clothes and coat very soon. As for money, I have hardly a kopeck about me at this moment." "You shall have lots of money. By the evening I shall have plenty, so come along." "That's true enough, he'll have lots before evening," put in Lebedeff. "But look here, are you a great hand with the ladies? Let's know that first," asked Rogozhin. "Oh no," said the prince. "I couldn't, my illness. I hardly ever saw a soul." "Well, here, you fellow, you can come along with me now if you like," cried Rogozhin to Lebedeff, and so they all left the carriage. Lebedeff had his desire. He went off with the noisy group of Rogozhin's friends towards the Voznesensky, while the prince's route lay towards the Litaynaya. It was damp and wet. The prince asked his way of passers-by, and finding that he was a couple of miles or so from his destination, he determined to take a droshky. End of Part 1, Chapter 1. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey. Part 1, Chapter 2 of The Idiot. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Eva M. Martin. Part 1, Chapter 2. General Yepanchin lived in his own house near the Litaynaya. Besides this large residence, 5/6 of which was let in flats and lodgings, the general was owner of another enormous house in the Sadovaya, bringing in even more rent than the first. Besides these houses he had a delightful little estate just out of town, and some sort of factory in another part of the city. General Yepanchin, as everyone knew, had a good deal to do with certain government monopolies. He was also a voice, and an important one, in many rich public companies of various descriptions. In fact, he enjoyed the reputation of being a well-to-do man of busy habits, many ties, and affluent means. He had made himself indispensable in several quarters, amongst others in his department of the government, and yet it was a known fact that Fyodor Ivanovitch Yepanchin was a man of no education whatever, and had absolutely risen from the ranks. This last fact could of course reflect nothing but credit upon the general, and yet, though unquestionably a sagacious man, he had his own little weaknesses, very excusable ones, one of which was a dislike to any allusion to the above circumstance. He was undoubtedly clever. For instance, he made a point of never asserting himself when he would gain more by keeping in the background, and in consequence many exalted personages valued him principally for his humility and simplicity, and because he knew his place. And yet if these good people could only have had a peep into the mind of this excellent fellow who knew his place so well! The fact is that in spite of his knowledge of the world and his really remarkable abilities, he always liked to appear to be carrying out other people's ideas rather than his own. And also his luck seldom failed him, even at cards, for which he had a passion that he did not attempt to conceal. He played for high stakes, and moved altogether in very varied society. As to age, General Yepanchin was in the very prime of life, that is, about 55 years of age, the flowering time of existence, when real enjoyment of life begins. His healthy appearance, good colour, sound though discoloured teeth, sturdy figure, preoccupied air during business hours, and jolly good humour during his game at cards in the evening, all bore witness to his success in life, and combined to make existence a bed of roses to his excellency. The general was lord of a flourishing family, consisting of his wife and 3 grown-up daughters. He had married young, while still a lieutenant, his wife being a girl of about his own age, who possessed neither beauty nor education, and who brought him no more than 50 souls of landed property, which little estate served, however, as a nest-egg for far more important accumulations. The general never regretted his early marriage, or regarded it as a foolish youthful escapade, and he so respected and feared his wife that he was very near loving her. Mrs. Yepanchin came of the princely stock of Myshkin, which, if not a brilliant, was at all events a decidedly ancient family, and she was extremely proud of her descent. With a few exceptions, the worthy couple had lived through their long union very happily. While still young, the wife had been able to make important friends among the aristocracy, partly by virtue of her family descent, and partly by her own exertions, while in after life, thanks to their wealth and to the position of her husband in the service, she took her place among the higher circles as by right. During these last few years, all 3 of the general's daughters, Alexandra, Adelaida and Aglaya, had grown up and matured. Of course they were only Yepanchins, but their mother's family was noble. They might expect considerable fortunes, Their father had hopes of attaining to very high rank indeed in his country's service, all of which was satisfactory. All three of the girls were decidedly pretty, even the eldest, Alexandra, who was just 25 years old. The middle daughter was now 23, while the youngest, Aglaya, was 20. This youngest girl was absolutely a beauty, and had begun of late to attract considerable attention in society. But this was not all, for every one of the three was clever, well educated, and accomplished. It was a matter of general knowledge that the three girls were very fond of one another, and supported each other in every way. It was even said that the two elder ones had made certain sacrifices for the sake of the idol of the household, Aglaya. In society they not only disliked asserting themselves, but were actually retiring. Certainly no one could blame them for being too arrogant or haughty, and yet everybody was well aware that they were proud, and quite understood their own value. The eldest was musical, while the second was a clever artist, which fact she had concealed until lately. In a word, the world spoke well of the girls, but they were not without their enemies, and occasionally people talked with horror of the number of books they had read. They were in no hurry to marry. They liked good society, but were not too keen about it. All this was the more remarkable because everyone was well aware of the hopes and aims of their parents. It was about 11 o'clock in the forenoon when the prince rang the bell at General Yepanchin's door. The general lived on the first floor or flat of the house, as modest a lodging as his position permitted. A liveried servant opened the door, and the prince was obliged to enter into long explanations with this gentleman, who from the first glance looked at him and his bundle with grave suspicion. At last, however, on the repeated positive assurance that he really was Prince Myshkin, and must absolutely see the general on business, the bewildered domestic showed him into a little antechamber, leading to a waiting room that adjoined the general's study. There handing him over to another servant, whose duty it was to be in this antechamber all the morning, and announce visitors to the general. This second individual wore a dress coat, and was some 40 years of age. He was the general's special study servant, and well aware of his own importance. "Wait in the next room, please, and leave your bundle here," said the doorkeeper, as he sat down comfortably in his own easy chair in the antechamber. He looked at the prince in severe surprise, as the latter settled himself in another chair alongside, with his bundle on his knees. "If you don't mind, I would rather sit here with you," said the prince. "I should prefer it to sitting in there." "Oh, but you can't stay here. You are a visitor, a guest, so to speak. Is it the general himself you wish to see?" The man evidently could not take in the idea of such a shabby-looking visitor, and had decided to ask once more. "Yes, I have business," began the prince. "I do not ask you what your business may be. All I have to do is to announce you, and unless the secretary comes in here, I cannot do that." The man's suspicions seemed to increase more and more. The prince was too unlike the usual run of daily visitors, and although the general certainly did receive, on business, all sorts and conditions of men, yet in spite of this fact the servant felt great doubts on the subject of this particular visitor. The presence of the secretary as an intermediary was, he judged, essential in this case. "Surely you are from abroad?" he inquired at last in a confused sort of way. He had begun his sentence intending to say, "Surely you are not Prince Myshkin, are you?" "Yes, straight from the train. Did not you intend to say, 'Surely you are not Prince Myshkin,' just now, but refrained out of politeness?" grunted the astonished servant. "I assure you I am not deceiving you. You shall not have to answer for me. As to my being dressed like this and carrying a bundle, there's nothing surprising in that. The fact is, my circumstances are not particularly rosy at this moment. No, no, I'm not afraid of that, you see. I have to announce you, that's all. The secretary will be out directly. That is, unless you... yes, that's the rub. Unless you... Come, you must allow me to ask you. You've not come to beg, have you? Oh dear, no. You can be perfectly easy on that score. I have quite another matter on hand. You must excuse my asking, you know. Your appearance led me to think... But just wait for the secretary. The general is busy now, but the secretary is sure to come out. Oh, well, look here, if I have some time to wait, would you mind telling me, is there any place about where I could have a smoke? I have my pipe and tobacco with me. Smoke? Said the man in shocked but disdainful surprise, blinking his eyes at the prince as though he could not believe his senses. No, sir, you cannot smoke here, and I wonder you are not ashamed of the very suggestion. Ah, a cool idea that, I declare. Oh, I didn't mean in this room. I know I can't smoke here, of course. I'd adjourn to some other room, wherever you'd like to show me to. You see, I'm used to smoking a good deal, and now I haven't had a puff for 3 hours. However, just as you like. Now, how on earth am I to announce a man like that? Muttered the servant. In the first place, you've no right in here at all. You ought to be in the waiting-room, because you're a sort of visitor, a guest, in fact. And I shall catch it for this. Look here, do you intend to take up your abode with us? He added, glancing once more at the prince's bundle, which evidently gave him no peace. No, I don't think so. I don't think I should stay, even if they were to invite me. I've simply come to make their acquaintance, and nothing more. Make their acquaintance? Asked the man in amazement, and with redoubled suspicion. Then why did you say you had business with the general? Oh, well, very little business. There is one little matter, some advice I'm going to ask him for. But my principal object is simply to introduce myself, because I am Prince Myshkin, and Madame Yepanchin is the last of her branch of the house, and besides herself and me there are no other Myshkins left. What? You're a relation, then, are you? Asked the servant, so bewildered that he began to feel quite alarmed. Well, hardly so. If you stretch a point, we are relations, of course, but so distant that one cannot really take cognizance of it. I once wrote to your mistress from abroad, but she did not reply. However, I have thought it right to make acquaintance with her on my arrival. I am telling you all this in order to ease your mind, for I see you are still far from comfortable on my account. All you have to do is to announce me as Prince Myshkin, and the object of my visit will be plain enough. If I am received, very good. If not, well, very good again. But they are sure to receive me, I should think. Madame Yepanchin will naturally be curious to see the only remaining representative of her family. She values her Myshkin descent very highly, if I am rightly informed. The prince's conversation was artless and confiding to a degree, and the servant could not help feeling that, as from visitor to common serving man, this state of things was highly improper. His conclusion was that one of two things must be the explanation: either that this was a begging impostor, or that the prince, if prince he were, was simply a fool, without the slightest ambition. For a sensible prince with any ambition would certainly not wait about in anterooms with servants, and talk of his own private affairs like this. In either case, how was he to announce this singular visitor? "I really think I must request you to step into the next room," he said with all the insistence he could muster. "Why? If I had been sitting there now, I should not have had the opportunity of making these personal explanations. I see you are still uneasy about me, and keep eyeing my cloak and bundle. Don't you think you might go in yourself now, without waiting for the secretary to come out?" "No, no, I can't announce a visitor like yourself without the secretary. Besides, the general said he was not to be disturbed. He is with the Colonel C. Gavrila Ardalionovitch goes in without announcing." "Who may that be? A clerk?" "What, Gavrila Ardalionovitch? Oh no, he belongs to one of the companies. Look here, at all events, put your bundle down. Here." "Yes, I will if I may. And can I take off my cloak?" "Of course. You can't go in there with it on, anyhow." The prince rose and took off his mantle, revealing a neat enough morning costume, little worn but well made. He wore a steel watch chain, and from this chain there hung a silver Geneva watch. Fool the prince might be, still the general's servant felt that it was not correct for him to continue to converse thus with a visitor, in spite of the fact that the prince pleased him somehow. "And what time of day does the lady receive?" the latter asked, reseating himself in his old place. "Oh, that's not in my province. I believe she receives at any time. It depends on the visitors. The dressmaker goes in at 11. Gavrila Ardalionovitch is allowed much earlier than other people, too. He is even admitted to early lunch now and then." "It is much warmer in the rooms here than it is abroad at this season," observed the prince. "But it is much warmer there out of doors. As for the houses, a Russian can't live in them in the winter until he gets accustomed to them." "Don't they heat them at all?" "Well, they do heat them a little, but the houses and stoves are so different to ours." Were you long away?" "4 years, and I was in the same place nearly all the time, in one village." "You must have forgotten Russia, hadn't you?" "Yes, indeed I had, a good deal. And would you believe it, I often wonder at myself for not having forgotten how to speak Russian. Even now, as I talk to you, I keep saying to myself, how well I am speaking it. Perhaps that is partly why I am so talkative this morning. I assure you, ever since yesterday evening I've had the strongest desire to go on and on talking Russian." "Yes. Did you live in Petersburg in former years?" This good flunkey, in spite of his conscientious scruples, really could not resist continuing such a very genteel and agreeable conversation. "In Petersburg? Oh no, hardly at all. And now they say so much is changed in the place that even those who did know it well are obliged to relearn what they knew. They talk a good deal about the new law courts and changes there, don't they?" "Yes, that's true enough. Well now, how is the law over there? Do they administer it more justly than here?" "Oh, I don't know about that. I've heard much that is good about our legal administration, too. There is no capital punishment here, for one thing." "Is there over there?" "Yes, I saw an execution in France, at Lyons. Schneider took me over with him to see it." "What, did they hang the fellow?" "No, they cut off people's heads in France." "What did the fellow do? Yell?" "Oh no, it's the work of an instant. They put a man inside a frame, and a sort of broad knife falls by machinery. They call the thing a guillotine. It falls with fearful force and weight. The head springs off so quickly that you can't wink your eye in between. But all the preparations are so dreadful. When they announce the sentence, you know, and prepare the criminal and tie his hands, and cart him off to the scaffold, that's the fearful part of the business. The people all crowd round, even women, though they don't at all approve of women looking on." "No, it's not a thing for women." "Of course not, of course not. The criminal was a fine, intelligent, fearless man. Le Gros was his name, and I may tell you, believe it or not as you like, that when that man stepped upon the scaffold, he cried. He did indeed. He was as white as a bit of paper. Isn't it a dreadful idea that he should have cried? Cried! Who ever heard of a grown man crying from fear? Not a child, but a man who never had cried before, a grown man of 45 years. Imagine what must have been going on in that man's mind at such a moment, what dreadful convulsions his whole spirit must have endured. It is an outrage on the soul, that's what it is. Because it is said, 'Thou shalt not kill,' is he to be killed because he murdered someone else? No, it is not right, it's an impossible theory. I assure you, I saw the sight a month ago, and it's dancing before my eyes to this moment. I dream of it, often." The prince had grown animated as he spoke, and a tinge of colour suffused his pale face, though his way of talking was as quiet as ever. The servant followed his words with sympathetic interest. Clearly he was not at all anxious to bring the conversation to an end. Who knows? Perhaps he too was a man of imagination and with some capacity for thought. "Well, at all events, it is a good thing that there's no pain when the poor fellow's head flies off," he remarked. "Do you know, though," cried the prince warmly, "you made that remark now, and everyone says the same thing, and the machine is designed with the purpose of avoiding pain, this guillotine, I mean. But a thought came into my head then. What if it be a bad plan, after all? You may laugh at my idea, perhaps, but I could not help its occurring to me all the same. Now with the rack and tortures and so on, you suffer terrible pain, of course, but then your torture is bodily pain only, although no doubt you have plenty of that, until you die. But here, I should imagine the most terrible part of the whole punishment is, not the bodily pain at all, but the certain knowledge that in an hour, then in 10 minutes, then in half a minute, then now, this very instant, your soul must quit your body, and that you will no longer be a man, and that this is certain, certain. That's the point, the certainty of it. Just that instant when you place your head on the block and hear the iron grate over your head, then, that quarter of a second is the most awful of all. This is not my own fantastical opinion. Many people have thought the same, but I feel it so deeply that I'll tell you what I think. I believe that to execute a man for murder is to punish him immeasurably more dreadfully than is equivalent to his crime. A murder by sentence is far more dreadful than a murder committed by a criminal. The man who is attacked by robbers at night, in a dark wood or anywhere, undoubtedly hopes and hopes that he may yet escape until the very moment of his death. There are plenty of instances of a man running away or imploring for mercy, at all events hoping on in some degree, even after his throat was cut. But in the case of an execution, that last hope, having which it is so immeasurably less dreadful to die, is taken away from the wretch, and certainty substituted in its place. There is his sentence, and with it that terrible certainty that he cannot possibly escape death, which I consider must be the most dreadful anguish in the world. You may place a soldier before a cannon's mouth in battle and fire upon him, and he will still hope. But read to that same soldier his death sentence, and he will either go mad or burst into tears. Who dares to say that any man can suffer this without going mad? No, no! It is an abuse, a shame. It is unnecessary. Why should such a thing exist? Doubtless there may be men who have been sentenced, who have suffered this mental anguish for a while, and then have been reprieved. Perhaps such men may have been able to relate their feelings afterwards. Our Lord Christ spoke of this anguish and dread. No, 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 no man should be treated so. No man, no man. The servant, though of course he could not have expressed all this as the prince did, still clearly entered into it and was greatly conciliated. as was evident from the increased amiability of his expression. "If you are really very anxious for a smoke," he remarked, "I think it might possibly be managed, if you are very quick about it. You see, they might come out and inquire for you, and you wouldn't be on the spot. You see that door there? Go in there, and you'll find a little room on the right. You can smoke there, only open the window, because I ought not to allow it, really, and—" But there was no time after all. A young fellow entered the ante-room at this moment, with a bundle of papers in his hand. The footman hastened to help him take off his overcoat. The new arrival glanced at the prince out of the corners of his eyes. "This gentleman declares, Gavrila Ardalionovitch," began the man confidentially and almost familiarly, "that he is Prince Myshkin and a relative of Madame Yepanchins. He has just arrived from abroad, with nothing but a bundle by way of luggage." The prince did not hear the rest, because at this point the servant continued his communication in a whisper. Gavrila Ardalionovitch listened attentively, and gazed at the prince with great curiosity. At last he motioned the man aside and stepped hurriedly towards the prince. "Are you Prince Myshkin?" he asked with the greatest courtesy and amiability. He was a remarkably handsome young fellow of some 28 summers, fair and of middle height. He wore a small beard, and his face was most intelligent. Yet his smile, in spite of its sweetness, was a little thin, if I may so call it, and showed his teeth too evenly. His gaze, though decidedly good-humoured and ingenuous, was a trifle too inquisitive and intent to be altogether agreeable. Probably when he is alone he looks quite different, and hardly smiles at all, thought the prince. He explained about himself in a few words, very much the same as he had told the footman and Rogozhin beforehand. Gavrila Ardalionovitch meanwhile seemed to be trying to recall something. "Was it not you, then, who sent a letter a year or less ago, from Switzerland, I think it was, to Elizabetha Prokofievna, Mrs. Yepanchin?" "It was." "Oh, then, of course they will remember who you are. You wish to see the general? I'll tell him at once. He will be free in a minute. But you had better wait in the antechamber, hadn't you? Why is he here?" he added severely to the man. "I tell you, sir, he wished it himself." At this moment the study door opened, and a military man, with a portfolio under his arm, came out talking loudly, and after bidding good-bye to someone inside, took his departure. "You there, Gania?" cried a voice from the study. "Come in here, will you?" Gavrila Ardalionovitch nodded to the prince and entered the room hastily. A couple of minutes later the door opened again, and the affable voice of Gania cried, "Come in, please, prince." End of Part 1, Chapter 2. Recording by Martin Geeson in Haslemere, Surrey. Part 1, Chapter 3 of The Idiot. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Eva M. Martin. Part 1, Chapter 3. General Ivan Fyodorovitch Yepanchin was standing in the middle of the room, and gazed with great curiosity at the prince as he entered. He even advanced a couple of steps to meet him. The prince came forward and introduced himself. "Quite so," replied the general. "And what can I do for you?" "Oh, I have no special business. My principal object was to make your acquaintance. I should not like to disturb you. I do not know your times and arrangements here, you see, but I have only just arrived. I came straight from the station. I come direct from Switzerland." The general very nearly smiled, but thought better of it and kept his smile back. Then he reflected, blinked his eyes, stared at his guest once more from head to foot, then abruptly motioned him to a chair, sat down himself, and waited with some impatience for the prince to speak. Gania stood at his table in the far corner of the room, turning over papers. "I have not much time for making acquaintances as a rule," said the general, "but as of course you have your object in coming, I felt sure you would think I had some object in view when I resolved to pay you this visit," the prince interrupted. "But I give you my word, beyond the pleasure of making your acquaintance, I had no personal object whatever." "The pleasure is of course mutual, but life is not all pleasure, as you are aware. There is such a thing as business, and I really do not see what possible reason there can be, or what we have in common to—" "Oh, there is no reason, of course, and I suppose there is nothing in common between us, or very little. For if I am Prince Myshkin, and your wife happens to be a member of my house, that can hardly be called a reason. I quite understand that. And yet that was my whole motive for coming. You see, I have not been in Russia for 4 years, and knew very little about anything when I left. I had been very ill for a long time, and I feel now the need of a few good friends. In fact, I have a certain question upon which I much need advice, and do not know whom to go to for it. I thought of your family when I was passing through Berlin. They are almost relations, I said to myself, so I'll begin with them. Perhaps we may get on with each other, I with them and they with me, if they are kind people. And I have heard that you are very kind people." "Oh, thank you, I'm sure," replied the general, considerably taken aback. "May I ask where you have taken up your quarters?" "Nowhere as yet." "What? Straight from the station to my house? And how about your luggage?" "I only had a small bundle containing linen with me, nothing more. I can carry it in my hand easily. There will be plenty of time to take a room in some hotel by the evening." "Oh, then you do intend to take a room?" "Of course." "To judge from your words, you came straight to my house with the intention of staying there." "That can only have been on your invitation. I confess, however, that I should not have stayed here, even if you had invited me. Not for any particular reason, but because it is, well, contrary to my practice and nature, somehow." "Oh, indeed? Then it is perhaps as well that I neither did invite you, nor do invite you now. Excuse me, prince, but we had better make this matter clear once for all. We have just agreed that with regard to our relationship there is not much to be said, though of course it would have been very delightful to us to feel that such relationship did actually exist. Therefore, perhaps I had better get up and go away," said the prince, laughing merrily as he rose from his place, just as merrily as though the circumstances were by no means strained or difficult. "And I give you my word, General, that though I know nothing whatever of manners and customs of society, and how people live and all that, yet I felt quite sure that this visit of mine would end exactly as it has ended now. Oh, well, I suppose it's all right. Especially as my letter was not answered." The prince's expression was so good-natured at this moment, and so entirely free even from a suspicion of unpleasant feeling was the smile with which he looked at the general as he spoke, that the latter suddenly paused, and appeared to gaze at his guest from quite a new point of view, all in an instant. "Do you know, prince," he said in quite a different tone, "I do not know you at all, yet, and after all, Elizabetha Prokofievna would very likely be pleased to have a peep at a man of her own name. Wait a little, if you don't mind, and if you have time to spare." "Oh, I assure you I've lots of time. My time is entirely my own." And the prince immediately replaced his soft round hat on the table. "I confess I thought Elizabetha Prokofievna would very likely remember that I had written her a letter. Just now your servant, outside there, was dreadfully suspicious that I had come to beg of you. I noticed that. Probably he has very strict instructions on that score. But I assure you I did not come to beg. I came to make some friends. But I am rather bothered at having disturbed you. That's all I care about." "Look here, prince," said the general with a cordial smile. "If you really are the sort of man you appear to be, it may be a source of great pleasure to us to make your better acquaintance. But you see I am a very busy man, and have to be perpetually sitting here and signing papers, or off to see his excellency, or to my department, or somewhere. So that, though I should be glad to see more of people, nice people, you see however, I'm sure you're so well brought up that you will see at once. But how old are you, prince?" 26. "No, I thought you very much younger." "Yes, they say I have a young face. As to disturbing you, I shall soon learn to avoid doing that, for I hate disturbing people. Besides, you and I are so differently constituted, I should think, that there must be very little in common between us. Not that I will ever believe that there is nothing in common between any two people, as some declare is the case. I am sure people make a great mistake in sorting each other into groups by appearances. But I'm boring you, I see. Just 2 words. Have you any means at all? Or perhaps you may be intending to undertake some sort of employment. Excuse my questioning you, but—" "Oh, my dear sir, I esteem and understand your kindness in putting the question. No, at present I have no means whatever, and no employment either, but I hope to find some. I was living on other people abroad. Schneider, the professor who treated me, and taught me too, in Switzerland, gave me just enough money for my journey, so that now I have but a few kopecks left. There certainly is one question upon which I am anxious to have advice, but—" "Tell me, how do you intend to live now, and what are your plans?" interrupted the general. "I wish to work, somehow or other." "Oh yes, but then, you see, you are a philosopher. Have you any talents, or ability in any direction? That is, any that would bring in money and bread? Excuse me again." "Oh, don't apologize. No, I don't think I have either talents or special abilities of any kind. On the contrary. I have always been an invalid and unable to learn much. As for bread, I should think—" The general interrupted once more with questions, while the prince again replied with the narrative we have heard before. It appeared that the general had known Pavlicheff. But why the latter had taken an interest in the prince, that young gentleman could not explain, probably by virtue of the old friendship with his father, he thought. The prince had been left an orphan when quite a little child, and Pavlicheff had entrusted him to an old lady, a relative of his own, living in the country, the child needing the fresh air and exercise of country life. He was educated first by a governess and afterwards by a tutor, but could not remember much about this time of his life. His fits were so frequent then that they made almost an idiot of him. The prince used the expression idiot himself. Pavlicheff had met Professor Schneider in Berlin, and the latter had persuaded him to send the boy to Switzerland, to Schneider's establishment there, for the cure of his epilepsy. And 5 years before this time the prince was sent off. But Pavlicheff had died 2 or 3 years since, and Schneider had himself supported the young fellow, from that day to this, at his own expense. Although he had not quite cured him, he had greatly improved his condition. And now, at last, at the prince's own desire, and because of a certain matter which came to the ears of the latter, Schneider had dispatched the young man to Russia. The general was much astonished. "Then you have no one, absolutely no one in Russia?" he asked. "No one at present, but I hope to make friends. And then I have a letter from—" "At all events," put in the general, not listening to the news about the letter, "at all events you must have learned something. And your malady would not prevent your undertaking some easy work in one of the departments, for instance." "Oh dear, no! Oh no! As for a situation, I should much like to find one, for I am anxious to discover what I really am fit for. I have learned a good deal in the last 4 years, and besides I read a great many Russian books." "Russian books, indeed? Then of course you can read and write quite correctly." "Oh dear, yes." "Capital. And your handwriting?" "Ah, there I am really talented. I may say I am a real calligraphist. Let me write you something, just to show you," said the prince with some excitement. "With pleasure. In fact, it is very necessary. I like your readiness, prince. In fact, I must say, I like you very well altogether," said the general. "What delightful writing materials you have here, such a lot of pencils and things, and what beautiful paper. It's a charming room altogether. I know that picture, it's a Swiss view. I'm sure the artist painted it from nature, and that I have seen the very place. Quite likely, though I bought it here. Gania, give the prince some paper. Here are pens and paper. Now then, take this table. What's this?" the general continued to Gania, who had that moment taken a large photograph out of his portfolio and shown it to his senior. "Hallo! Nastasya Filippovna. Did she send it you herself?" "Herself?" he inquired with much curiosity and great animation. "She gave it me just now, when I called in to congratulate her. I asked her for it long ago. I don't know whether she meant it for a hint that I had come empty-handed, without a present for her birthday, or what," added Gania with an unpleasant smile. "Oh, nonsense, nonsense," said the general with decision. "What extraordinary ideas you have, Gania, as if she would hint. That's not her way at all. Besides, what could you give her without having thousands at your disposal? You might have given her your portrait, however. Has she ever asked you for it?" "No, not yet. Very likely she never will. I suppose you haven't forgotten about tonight, have you, Ivan Fedorovitch? You were one of those specially invited, you know." "Oh no, I remember all right, and I shall go, of course. I should think so. She's 25 years old today. And you know, Gania, you must be ready for great things. She has promised both myself and Afanasy Ivanovitch that she will give a decided answer tonight, yes or no, so be prepared." Gania suddenly became so ill at ease that his face grew paler than ever. "Are you sure she said that?" he asked, and his voice seemed to quiver as he spoke. "Yes, she promised. We both worried her so that she gave in. But she wished us to tell you nothing about it until the day." The general watched Gania's confusion intently, and clearly did not like it. "Remember, Ivan Fedorovitch," said Gania in great agitation, "that I was to be free too until her decision, and that even then I was to have my yes or no free." "Why, don't you? Aren't you?" began the general in alarm. "Oh, don't misunderstand." "But my dear fellow, what are you doing? What do you mean?" "Oh, I'm not rejecting her. I may have expressed myself badly, but I didn't mean that." "Reject her? I should think not," said the general with annoyance, and apparently not in the least anxious to conceal it. "Why, my dear fellow, it's not a question of your rejecting her. It is whether you are prepared to receive her consent joyfully and with proper satisfaction. How are things going on at home?" "At home? Oh, I can do as I like there, of course. Only my father will make a fool of himself as usual. He is rapidly becoming a general nuisance. I don't ever talk to him now, but I hold him in check, safe enough. I swear if it had not been for my mother I would have shown him the way out long ago. My mother is always crying, of course, and my sister sulks. I had to tell them at last that I intended to be master of my own destiny, and that I expect to be obeyed at home. At least I gave my sister to understand as much, and my mother was present. "Well, I must say I cannot understand it," said the general, shrugging his shoulders and dropping his hands. "You remember your mother, Nina Alexandrovna? That day she came and sat here and groaned, and when I asked her what was the matter, she said, 'Oh, it's such a dishonour to us.' Dishonour! Stuff and nonsense! I should like to know who can reproach Nastasya Filippovna, or who can say a word of any kind against her. Did she mean because Nastasia had been living with Totski? What nonsense it is! You would not let her come near your daughters, says Nina Alexandrovna. What next, I wonder? I don't see how she can fail to understand." "Her own position," prompted Gania. "She does understand. Don't be annoyed with her. I have warned her not to meddle in other people's affairs. However, although there's comparative peace at home at present, the storm will break if anything is finally settled tonight." The prince heard the whole of the foregoing conversation as he sat at the table writing. He finished at last, and brought the result of his labour to the general's desk. "So this is Nastasya Filippovna," he said, looking attentively and curiously at the portrait. "How wonderfully beautiful!" he immediately added, with warmth. The picture was certainly that of an unusually lovely woman. She was photographed in a black silk dress of simple design. Her hair was evidently dark and plainly arranged. Her eyes were deep and thoughtful, the expression of her face passionate but proud. She was rather thin, perhaps, and a little pale. Both Gania and the general gazed at the prince in amazement. "How do you know it's Nastasya Filippovna?" asked the general. "You surely don't know her already, do you?" "Yes, I do. I have only been one day in Russia, but I have heard of the great beauty." And the prince proceeded to narrate his meeting with Rogozhin in the train and the whole of the latter's story. "There's news!" said the general in some excitement, after listening to the story with engrossed attention. "Oh, of course it's nothing but humbug!" cried Gania, a little disturbed, however. "It's all humbug. The young merchant was pleased to indulge in a little innocent recreation. I have heard something of Rogozhin." "Yes, so have I," replied the general. "Nastasya Filippovna told us all about the earrings that very day. But now it's quite a different matter. You see, the fellow really has 1,000,000 of roubles, and he is passionately in love. The whole story smells of passion, and we all know what this class of gentry is capable of when infatuated. I am much afraid of some disagreeable scandal. I am indeed." "You are afraid of the 1,000,000, I suppose," said Gania, grinning and showing his teeth. "And you are not, I presume, hm?" "How did he strike you, prince?" asked Gania suddenly. "Did he seem to be a serious sort of a man, or just a common rowdy fellow? What was your opinion about the matter?" While Gania put this question, a new idea suddenly flashed into his brain and blazed out impatiently in his eyes. The general, who was really agitated and disturbed, looked at the prince too, but did not seem to expect much from his reply. "I really don't quite know how to tell you," replied the prince, "but it certainly did seem to me that the man was full of passion, and not perhaps quite healthy passion. He seemed to be still far from well. Very likely he will be in bed again in a day or two, especially if he lives fast." "No, do you think so?" said the general, catching at the idea. "Yes, I do think so." Yes, but the sort of scandal I referred to may happen at any moment. It may be this very evening," remarked Gania to the general, with a smile. "Of course, quite so. In that case it all depends upon what is going on in her brain at this moment. You know the kind of person she is at times." "How? What kind of person is she?" cried the general, arrived at the limits of his patience. "Look here, Gania, don't you go annoying her tonight. What you are to do is to be as agreeable towards her as ever you can. Well, what are you smiling at? You must understand, Gania, that I have no interest whatever in speaking like this. Whichever way the question is settled, it will be to my advantage. Nothing will move Totski from his resolution, so I run no risk. If there is anything I desire, you must know that it is your benefit only. Can't you trust me? You are a sensible fellow, and I have been counting on you, for in this matter that... "Yes, that's the chief thing," said Gania, helping the general out of his difficulties again, and curling his lips in an envenomed smile, which he did not attempt to conceal. He gazed with his fevered eyes straight into those of the general, as though he were anxious that the latter might read his thoughts. The general grew purple with anger. "Yes, of course it is the chief thing," he cried, looking sharply at Gania. "What a very curious man you are, Gania. You actually seem to be glad to hear of this millionaire fellow's arrival, just as though you wished for an excuse to get out of the whole thing. This is an affair in which you ought to act honestly with both sides, and give due warning, to avoid compromising others. But even now there is still time. Do you understand me? I wish to know whether you desire this arrangement or whether you do not. If not, say so, and welcome. No one is trying to force you into the snare, Gavrila Ardalionovitch, if you see a snare in the matter, at least." "I do desire it," murmured Gania, softly but firmly, lowering his eyes, and he relapsed into gloomy silence. The general was satisfied. He had excited himself, and was evidently now regretting that he had gone so far. He turned to the prince, and suddenly the disagreeable thought of the latter's presence struck him, and the certainty that he must have heard every word of the conversation. But he felt at ease in another moment. It only needed one glance at the prince to see that in that quarter there was nothing to fear. "Oh!" cried the general, catching sight of the prince's specimen of calligraphy, which the latter had now handed him for inspection. "Why, this is simply beautiful! Look at that, Gania, there's real talent there." On a sheet of thick writing paper, the prince had written in medieval characters the legend, "The gentle Abbot Pafnute signed this." "There," explained the prince with great delight and animation, "there, that's the abbot's real signature, from a manuscript of the 14th century. All these old abbots and bishops used to write most beautifully, with such taste and so much care and diligence. Have you no copy of Pogodin, General? If you had one, I could show you another type. Stop a bit. Here you have the large round writing common in France during the 18th century. Some of the letters are shaped quite differently from those now in use. It was the writing current then, and employed by public writers generally. I copied this from one of them, and you can see how good it is. Look at the well-rounded A and D. I have tried to translate the French character into the Russian letters, a difficult thing to do, but I think I have succeeded fairly. Here is a fine sentence written in a good original hand. 'Zeal triumphs over all.' That is the script of the Russian War Office. That is how official documents addressed to important personages should be written. The letters are round, the type black, and the style somewhat remarkable. A stylist would not allow these ornaments or attempts at flourishes. Just look at these unfinished tales. But it has distinction, and really depicts the soul of the writer. He would like to give play to his imagination, and follow the inspiration of his genius, but a soldier is only at ease in the guard-room, and the pen stops half-way, a slave to discipline. How delightful! The first time I met an example of this handwriting, I was positively astonished. And where do you think I chanced to find it? In Switzerland, of all places. Now, that is an ordinary English hand. It can hardly be improved. It is so refined and exquisite, almost perfection. This is an example of another kind, a mixture of styles. The copy was given me by a French commercial traveller. It is founded on the English, but the downstrokes are a little blacker and more marked. Notice that the oval has some slight modification. It is more rounded. This writing allows for flourishes. Now, a flourish is a dangerous thing. Its use requires such taste, but if successful, what a distinction it gives to the whole! It results in an incomparable type, one to fall in love with. Dear me, how you have gone into all the refinements and details of the question! Why, my dear fellow, you are not a calligraphist, you are an artist. Eh, Gania? Wonderful, said Gania. And he knows it too, he added with a sarcastic smile. You may smile, but there's a career in this, said the general. You don't know what a great personage I shall show this to, prince. Why, you can command a situation at 35 roubles per month to start with. However, it's 12:30, he concluded, looking at his watch. So to business, prince, for I must be setting to work, and shall not see you again today. Sit down a minute. I have told you that I cannot receive you myself very often, but I should like to be of some assistance to you, some small assistance, of a kind that would give you satisfaction. I shall find you a place in one of the state departments, an easy place, but you will require to be accurate. Now, as to your plans, in the house, or rather in the family of Gania here, my young friend, whom I hope you will know better, his mother and sister have prepared 2 or 3 rooms for lodgers, and let them to highly recommended young fellows, with board and attendance. I am sure Nina Alexandrovna will take you in on my recommendation. There you will be comfortable and well taken care of, for I do not think, prince, that you are the sort of man to be left to the mercy of fate in a town like Petersburg. Nina Alexandrovna, Gania's mother, and Varvara Alexandrovna are ladies for whom I have the highest possible esteem and respect. Nina Alexandrovna is the wife of General Ardalion Alexandrovitch, my old brother-in-arms, with whom I regret to say, on account of certain circumstances, I am no longer acquainted. I give you all this information, prince, in order to make it clear to you that I am personally recommending you to this family, and that in so doing I am more or less taking upon myself to answer for you. The terms are most reasonable, and I trust that your salary will very shortly prove amply sufficient for your expenditure. Of course, pocket money is a necessity, if only a little. Do not be angry, prince, if I strongly recommend you to avoid carrying money in your pocket. But as your purse is quite empty at the present moment, you must allow me to press these 25 roubles upon your acceptance, as something to begin with. Of course we will settle this little matter another time, and if you are the upright, honest man you look, I anticipate very little trouble between us on that score. Taking so much interest in you as you may perceive I do, I am not without my object, and you shall know it in good time. You see, I am perfectly candid with you. I hope, Gania, you have nothing to say against the prince's taking up his abode in your house. Oh, on the contrary, my mother will be very glad, said Gania, courteously and kindly. I think only one of your rooms is engaged as yet, is it not? That fellow Ferdishenko. Yes, I don't like that Ferdishenko. I can't understand why Nastasya Filippovna encourages him so. Is he really her cousin, as he says? Oh dear no, it's all a joke. He's no more cousin than I am. Well, what do you think of the arrangement, prince? Thank you, General. You have behaved very kindly to me. All the more so since I did not ask you to help me. I don't say that out of pride. I certainly did not know where to lay my head tonight. Rogozhin asked me to come to his house, of course, but— Rogozhin? No, no, my good fellow. I should strongly recommend you, paternally, or, if you prefer it, as a friend, to forget all about Rogozhin, and in fact to stick to the family in which you are about to enter. "Thank you," began the prince, "and since you are so very kind, there is just one matter which I—" "You really must excuse me," interrupted the general, "but I positively haven't another moment now. I shall just tell Elizabetha Prokofievna about you, and if she wishes to receive you at once, as I shall advise her, I strongly recommend you to ingratiate yourself with her at the first opportunity, for my wife may be of the greatest service to you in many ways. If she cannot receive you now, you must be content to wait till another time. Meanwhile you, Gania, just look over these accounts, will you? We mustn't forget to finish off that matter." The general left the room, and the prince never succeeded in broaching the business which he had on hand, though he had endeavoured to do so 4 times. Gania lit a cigarette and offered one to the prince. The latter accepted the offer, but did not talk, being unwilling to disturb Gania's work. He commenced to examine the study and its contents. But Gania hardly so much as glanced at the papers lying before him. He was absent and thoughtful, and his smile and general appearance struck the prince still more disagreeably now that the two were left alone together. Suddenly Gania approached our hero, who was at the moment standing over Nastasya Filippovna's portrait, gazing at it. "Do you admire that sort of woman, prince?" he asked, looking intently at him. He seemed to have some special object in the question. "It's a wonderful face," said the prince, "and I feel sure that her destiny is not by any means an ordinary, uneventful one. Her face is smiling enough, but she must have suffered terribly. Hasn't she? Her eyes show it, those 2 bones there, the little points under her eyes, just where her cheek begins. It's a proud face too, terribly proud. And I can't say whether she is good and kind or not. Oh, if she be but good, that would make all well." "And would you marry a woman like that now?" continued Gania, never taking his excited eyes off the prince's face. "I cannot marry at all," said the latter. "I am an invalid." "Would Rogozhin marry her, do you think?" "Why not? Certainly he would, I should think. He would marry her tomorrow. Marry her tomorrow and murder her in a week." Hardly had the prince uttered the last word when Gania gave such a fearful shudder that the prince almost cried out. "What's the matter?" said he, seizing Gania's hand. "Your Highness, His Excellency begs your presence in Her Excellency's apartments," announced the footman, appearing at the door. The prince immediately followed the man out of the room. End of Part 1, Chapter 3. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey. Part 1, Chapter 4 of The Idiot. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Idiot, by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Eva M. Martin. Part 1, Chapter 4. All three of the Miss Yepanchins were fine, healthy girls, well grown, with good shoulders and busts, and strong, almost masculine hands. And of course, with all the above attributes, they enjoyed capital appetites, of which they were not in the least ashamed. Elizabetha Prokofievna sometimes informed the girls that they were a little too candid in this matter, but in spite of their outward deference to their mother, these three young women, in solemn conclave, had long agreed to modify the unquestioning obedience which they had been in the habit of according to her, and Mrs. General Yepanchin had judged it better to say nothing about it, though of course she was well aware of the fact. It is true that her nature sometimes rebelled against these dictates of reason, and that she grew yearly more capricious and impatient, but having a respectful and well-disciplined husband under her thumb at all times, she found it possible, as a rule, to empty any little accumulations of spleen upon his head, and therefore the harmony of the family was kept duly balanced, and things went as smoothly as family matters can. Mrs. Yepanchin had a fair appetite herself, and generally took her share of the capital midday lunch which was always served for the girls, and which was nearly as good as a dinner. The young ladies used to have a cup of coffee each before this meal at 10 o'clock, while still in bed. This was a favourite and unalterable arrangement with them. At 12:30 the table was laid in the small dining-room, and occasionally the general himself appeared at the family gathering, if he had time. Besides tea and coffee, cheese, honey, butter, pancakes of various kinds, the lady of the house loved these best, cutlets and so on, there was generally strong beef soup and other substantial delicacies. On the particular morning on which our story has opened, the family had assembled in the dining-room, and were waiting the general's appearance, the latter having promised to come this day. If he had been one moment late, he would have been sent for at once, but he turned up punctually. As he came forward to wish his wife good morning and kiss her hands, as his custom was, he observed something in her look which boded ill. He thought he knew the reason, and had expected it, but still he was not altogether comfortable. His daughters advanced to kiss him too, and though they did not look exactly angry, there was something strange in their expression as well. The general was, owing to certain circumstances, a little inclined to be too suspicious at home, and needlessly nervous, but as an experienced father and husband, he judged it better to take measures at once to protect himself from any dangers there might be in the air. However, I hope I shall not interfere with the proper sequence of my narrative too much if I diverge for a moment at this point, in order to explain the mutual relations between General Yepanchin's family and others acting a part in this history, at the time when we take up the thread of their destiny. I have already stated that the general, though he was a man of lowly origin and of poor education, was for all that an experienced and talented husband and father. Among other things, he considered it undesirable to hurry his daughters to the matrimonial altar, and to worry them too much with assurances of his paternal wishes for their happiness, as is the custom among parents of many grown-up daughters. He even succeeded in ranging his wife on his side on this question, though he found the feat very difficult to accomplish, because unnatural. But the general's arguments were conclusive, and founded upon obvious facts. The general considered that the girl's taste and good sense should be allowed to develop and mature deliberately, and that the parent's duty should merely be to keep watch, in order that no strange or undesirable choice be made, but that the selection once effected, both father and mother were bound from that moment to enter heart and soul into the cause, and to see that the matter progressed without hindrance until the altar should be happily reached. Besides this, it was clear that the Yepanchins' position gained each year, with geometrical accuracy, both as to financial solidity and social weight, and therefore the longer the girls waited, the better was their chance of making a brilliant match. But again, amidst the incontrovertible facts just recorded, one more, equally significant, rose up to confront the family, and this was that the eldest daughter, Alexandra, had imperceptibly arrived at her 25th birthday. Almost at the same moment, Afanasy Ivanovitch Totski, a man of immense wealth, high connections, and good standing, announced his intention of marrying. Afanasy Ivanovitch was a gentleman of 55 years of age, artistically gifted, and of most refined tastes. He wished to marry well, and moreover he was a keen admirer and judge of beauty. Now, since Totski had of late been upon terms of great cordiality with Yepanchin, which excellent relations were intensified by the fact that they were, so to speak, partners in several financial enterprises, it so happened that the former now put in a friendly request to the general for counsel with regard to the important step he meditated. Might he suggest, for instance, such a thing as a marriage between himself and one of the general's daughters? Evidently the quiet, pleasant current of the family life of the Yepanchins was about to undergo a change. The undoubted beauty of the family, par excellence, was the youngest, Aglaya, as aforesaid. But Totski himself, though an egotist of the extremest type, realized that he had no chance there. Aglaya was clearly not for such as he. Perhaps the sisterly love and friendship of the three girls had more or less exaggerated Aglaya's chances of happiness. In their opinion, the latter's destiny was not merely to be very happy, she was to live in a heaven on earth. Aglaya's husband was to be a compendium of all the virtues, and of all success, not to speak of fabulous wealth. The two elder sisters had agreed that all was to be sacrificed by them, if need be, for Aglaya's sake. Her dowry was to be colossal and unprecedented. The general and his wife were aware of this agreement, and therefore when Totski suggested himself for one of the sisters, the parents made no doubt that one of the two elder girls would probably accept the offer, since Totski would certainly make no difficulty as to dowry. The general valued the proposal very highly. He knew life, and realized what such an offer was worth. The answer of the sisters to the communication was, if not conclusive, at least consoling and hopeful. It made known that the eldest, Alexandra, would very likely be disposed to listen to a proposal. Alexandra was a good-natured girl, though she had a will of her own. She was intelligent and kind-hearted, and if she were to marry Totski, she would make him a good wife. She did not care for a brilliant marriage. She was eminently a woman calculated to soothe and sweeten the life of any man. Decidedly pretty, if not absolutely handsome. What better could Totski wish? So the matter crept slowly forward. The general and Totski had agreed to avoid any hasty and irrevocable step. Alexandra's parents had not even begun to talk to their daughters freely upon the subject, when suddenly, as it were, a dissonant chord was struck amid the harmony of the proceedings. Mrs. Yepanchin began to show signs of discontent, and this was a serious matter. A certain circumstance had crept in, a disagreeable and troublesome factor, which threatened to overturn the whole business. This circumstance had come into existence 18 years before. Close to an estate of Totski's, in one of the central provinces of Russia, there lived at that time a poor gentleman whose estate was of the wretchedest description. This gentleman was noted in the district for his persistent ill fortune. His name was Barashkov, and as regards family and descent he was vastly superior to Totski, but his estate was mortgaged to the last acre. One day, when he had ridden over to the town to see a creditor, the chief peasant of his village followed him shortly after, with the news that his house had been burnt down, and that his wife had perished with it, but his children were safe. Even Barashkov, inured to the storms of evil fortune as he was, could not stand this last stroke. He went mad, and died shortly after in the town hospital. His estate was sold for the creditors, and the little girls, two of them, of 7 and 8 years of age respectively, were adopted by Totski, who undertook their maintenance and education in the kindness of his heart. They were brought up together with the children of his German bailiff. Very soon, however, there was only one of them left, Nastasya Filippovna, for the other little one died of whooping cough. Totski, who was living abroad at this time, very soon forgot all about the child, but 5 years after, returning to Russia, it struck him that he would like to look over his estate and see how matters were going there, and arrived at his bailiff's house, he was not long in discovering that among the children of the latter there now dwelt a most lovely little girl of 12, sweet and intelligent and bright, and promising to develop beauty of most unusual quality, as to which last Totski was an undoubted authority. He only stayed at his country seat a few days on this occasion, but he had time to make his arrangements. Great changes took place in the child's education. A good governess was engaged, a Swiss lady of experience and culture. For 4 years this lady resided in the house with little Nastya, and then the education was considered complete. The governess took her departure, and another lady came down to fetch Nastya, by Totski's instructions. The child was now transported to another of Totski's estates in a distant part of the country. Here she found a delightful little house, just built, and prepared for her reception with great care and taste. And here she took up her abode, together with the lady who had accompanied her from her old home. In the house there were 2 experienced maids, musical instruments of all sorts, a charming young ladies' library, pictures, paint-boxes, a lap-dog, and everything to make life agreeable. Within a fortnight Totski himself arrived, and from that time he appeared to have taken a great fancy to this part of the world, and came down each summer, staying 2 and 3 months at a time. So passed 4 years, peacefully and happily, in charming surroundings. At the end of that time, and about 4 months after Totski's last visit, he had stayed but a fortnight on this occasion, a report reached Nastasya Filippovna that he was about to be married in St. Petersburg to a rich, eminent and lovely woman. The report was only partially true, the marriage project being only in an embryo condition, but a great change now came over Nastasya Filippovna. She suddenly displayed unusual decision of character, and without wasting time in thought, she left her country home and came up to St. Petersburg, straight to Totski's house, all alone. The latter, amazed at her conduct, began to express his displeasure, but he very soon became aware that he must change his voice, style, and everything else with this young lady. The good old times were gone. An entirely new and different woman sat before him, between whom and the girl he had left in the country last July there seemed nothing in common. In the first place, this new woman understood a good deal more than was usual for young people of her age. So much, indeed, that Totski could not help wondering where she had picked up her knowledge. Surely not from her young ladies' library. It even embraced legal matters and the world in general, to a considerable extent. Her character was absolutely changed. No more of the girlish alternations of timidity and petulance, the adorable naivete, the reveries, the tears, the playfulness. It was an entirely new and hitherto unknown being who now sat and laughed at him, and informed him to his face that she had never had the faintest feeling for him of any kind, except loathing and contempt which had followed closely upon her sensations of surprise and bewilderment after her first acquaintance with him. This new woman gave him further to understand that though it was absolutely the same to her whom he married, yet she had decided to prevent this marriage, for no particular reason, but that she chose to do so, and because she wished to amuse herself at his expense, for that it was quite her turn to laugh a little now. Such were her words. Very likely she did not give her real reason for this eccentric conduct, but at all events that was all the explanation she deigned to offer. Meanwhile Totski thought the matter over as well as his scattered ideas would permit. His meditations lasted a fortnight, however, and at the end of that time his resolution was taken. The fact was, Totski was at that time a man of 50 years of age. His position was solid and respectable. His place in society had long been firmly fixed upon safe foundations. He loved himself, his personal comforts, and his position better than all the world, as every respectable gentleman should. At the same time, his grasp of things in general soon showed Totski that he now had to deal with a being who was outside the pale of the ordinary rules of traditional behaviour, and who would not only threaten mischief, but would undoubtedly carry it out, and stop for no one. There was evidently, he concluded, something at work here. Some storm of the mind, some paroxysm of romantic anger, goodness knows against whom or what, some insatiable contempt. In a word, something altogether absurd and impossible, but at the same time most dangerous to be met with by any respectable person with a position in society to keep up. For a man of Totski's wealth and standing, it would of course have been the simplest possible matter to take steps which would rid him at once from all annoyance, while it was obviously impossible for Nastasya Filippovna to harm him in any way, either legally or by stirring up a scandal, for in the case of the latter danger, he could so easily remove her to a sphere of safety. However, these arguments would only hold good in case of Nastasia acting as others might in such an emergency. She was much more likely to overstep the bounds of reasonable conduct by some extraordinary eccentricity. Here the sound judgment of Totski stood him in good stead. He realized that Nastasia Filippovna must be well aware that she could do nothing by legal means to injure him, and that her flashing eyes betrayed some entirely different intention. Nastasia Filippovna was quite capable of ruining herself, and even of perpetrating something which would send her to Siberia, for the mere pleasure of injuring a man for whom she had developed so inhuman a sense of loathing and contempt. He had sufficient insight to understand that she valued nothing in the world, herself least of all, and he made no attempt to conceal the fact that he was a coward in some respects. For instance, if he had been told that he would be stabbed at the altar, or publicly insulted, he would undoubtedly have been frightened, but not so much at the idea of being murdered, or wounded, or insulted, as at the thought that if such things were to happen, he would be made to look ridiculous in the eyes of society. He knew well that Nastasia thoroughly understood him, and where to wound him and how. And therefore, as the marriage was still only in embryo, Totski decided to conciliate her by giving it up. His decision was strengthened by the fact that Nastasya Filippovna had curiously altered of late. It would be difficult to conceive how different she was physically, at the present time, to the girl of a few years ago. She was pretty then, but now... Totski laughed angrily when he thought how short-sighted he had been. In days gone by he remembered how he had looked at her beautiful eyes, how even then he had marvelled at their dark, mysterious depths, and at their wondering gaze, which seemed to seek an answer to some unknown riddle. Her complexion also had altered. She was now exceedingly pale, but curiously this change only made her more beautiful. Like most men of the world, Totski had rather despised such a cheaply bought conquest, but of late years he had begun to think differently about it. It had struck him as long ago as last spring that he ought to be finding a good match for Nastasia. For instance, some respectable and reasonable young fellow serving in a government office in another part of the country. How maliciously Nastasia laughed at the idea of such a thing now. However, it appeared to Totski that he might make use of her in another way, and he determined to establish her in St. Petersburg, surrounding her with all the comforts and luxuries that his wealth could command. In this way he might gain glory in certain circles. 5 years of this Petersburg life went by, and of course during that time a great deal happened. Totski's position was very uncomfortable. Having funked once, he could not totally regain his ease. He was afraid, he did not know why, but he was simply afraid of Nastasya Filippovna. For the first 2 years or so he had suspected that she wished to marry him herself, and that only her vanity prevented her telling him so. He thought that she wanted him to approach her with a humble proposal from his own side, but to his great and not entirely pleasurable amazement he discovered that this was by no means the case, and that were he to offer himself he would be refused. He could not understand such a state of things, and was obliged to conclude that it was pride, the pride of an injured and imaginative woman, which had gone to such lengths that it preferred to sit and nurse its contempt and hatred in solitude, rather than mount to heights of hitherto unattainable splendour. To make matters worse, she was quite impervious to mercenary considerations, and could not be bribed in any way. Finally, Totski took cunning means to try to break his chains and be free. He tried to tempt her in various ways to lose her heart. He invited princes, hussars, secretaries of embassies, poets, novelists, even socialists to see her, but not one of them all made the faintest impression upon Nastasia. It was as though she had a pebble in place of a heart, as though her feelings and affections were dried up and withered forever. She lived almost entirely alone. She read, she studied, she loved music. Her principal acquaintances were poor women of various grades, a couple of actresses, and the family of a poor school-teacher. Among these people she was much beloved. She received 4 or 5 friends sometimes of an evening. Totski often came. Lately, too, General Yepanchin had been enabled with great difficulty to introduce himself into her circle. Gania made her acquaintance also, and others were Ferdishenko, an ill-bred and would-be witty young clerk, and Ptitsin, a moneylender of modest and polished manners, who had risen from poverty. In fact, Nastasya Filippovna's beauty became a thing known to all the town, but not a single man could boast of anything more than his own admiration for her, and this reputation of hers, and her wit and culture and grace, all confirmed Totski in the plan he had now prepared. And it was at this moment that General Yepanchin began to play so large and important a part in the story. When Totski had approached the general with his request for friendly counsel as to a marriage with one of his daughters, he had made a full and candid confession. He had said that he intended to stop at no means to obtain his freedom. Even if Nastasia were to promise to leave him entirely alone in future, he would not, he said, believe and trust her. Words were not enough for him. He must have solid guarantees of some sort. So he and the general determined to try what an attempt to appeal to her heart would effect. Having arrived at Nastasia's house one day with Yepanchin, Totski immediately began to speak of the intolerable torment of his position. He admitted that he was to blame for all, but candidly confessed that he could not bring himself to feel any remorse for his original guilt towards herself, because he was a man of sensual passions, which were inborn and ineradicable, and that he had no power over himself in this respect, but that he wished seriously to marry at last, and that the whole fate of the most desirable social union which he contemplated was in her hands. In a word, he confided his all to her generosity of heart. General Yepanchin took up his part and spoke in the character of father of a family. He spoke sensibly, and without wasting words over any attempt at sentimentality. He merely recorded his full admission of her right to be the arbiter of Totski's destiny at this moment. He then pointed out that the fate of his daughter, and very likely of both his other daughters, now hung upon her reply. To Nastasia's question as to what they wished her to do, Totski confessed that he had been so frightened by her 5 years ago that he could never now be entirely comfortable until she herself married. He immediately added that such a suggestion from him would, of course, be absurd, unless accompanied by remarks of a more pointed nature. He very well knew, he said, that a certain young gentleman of good family, namely Gavrila Ardalionovitch Ivolgin, with whom she was acquainted, and whom she received at her house, had long loved her passionately, and would give his life for some response from her. The young fellow had confessed this love of his to him, Totski, and had also admitted it in the hearing of his benefactor, General Yepanchin. Lastly, he could not help being of opinion that Nastasia must be aware of Gania's love for her, and if he, Totski, mistook not, she had looked with some favour upon it, being often lonely and rather tired of her present life. Having remarked how difficult it was for him of all people to speak to her of these matters, Totski concluded by saying that he trusted Nastasya Filippovna would not look with contempt upon him if he now expressed his sincere desire to guarantee her future by a gift of 75,000 roubles. He added that the sum would have been left her all the same in his will, and that therefore she must not consider the gift as in any way an indemnification to her for anything, but that there was no reason, after all, why a man should not be allowed to entertain a natural desire to lighten his conscience, etc., etc. In fact, all that would naturally be said under the circumstances. Totski was very eloquent all through, and in conclusion just touched on the fact that not a soul in the world, not even General Yepanchin, had ever heard a word about the above 75,000 roubles, and that this was the first time he had ever given expression to his intentions in respect to them. Nastasya Filippovna's reply to this long rigmarole astonished both the friends considerably. Not only was there no trace of her former irony, of her old hatred and enmity, and of that dreadful laughter, the very recollection of which sent a cold chill down Totski's back to this very day. But she seemed charmed and really glad to have the opportunity of talking seriously with him for once in a way. She confessed that she had long wished to have a frank and free conversation, and to ask for friendly advice, but that pride had hitherto prevented her. Now, however, that the ice was broken, nothing could be more welcome to her than this opportunity. First, with a sad smile, and then with a twinkle of merriment in her eyes, she admitted that such a storm as that of 5 years ago was now quite out of the question. She said that she had long since changed her views of things, and recognized that facts must be taken into consideration in spite of the feelings of the heart. What was done and ended, and she could not understand why Totski should still feel alarmed. She next turned to General Yepanchin, and observed most courteously that she had long since known of his daughters, and that she had heard none but good report, that she had learned to think of them with deep and sincere respect. The idea alone that she could in any way serve them would be to her both a pride and a source of real happiness. It was true that she was lonely in her present life. Totski had judged her thoughts aright. She longed to rise, if not to love, at least to family life and new hopes and objects. But as to Gavrila Ardalionovitch, she could not as yet say much. She thought it must be the case that he loved her. She felt that she too might learn to love him, if she could be sure of the firmness of his attachment to herself. But he was very young, and it was a difficult question to decide. What she specially liked about him was that he worked and supported his family by his toil. She had heard that he was proud and ambitious. She had heard much that was interesting of his mother and sister. She had heard of them from Mr. Ptitsin, and would much like to make their acquaintance. But, another question, would they like to receive her into their house? At all events, though she did not reject the idea of this marriage, she desired not to be hurried. As for the 75,000 roubles, Mr. Totski need not have found any difficulty or awkwardness about the matter. She quite understood the value of money, and would, of course, accept the gift. She thanked him for his delicacy, however, but saw no reason why Gavrila Ardalionovitch should not know about it. She would not marry the latter, she said, until she felt persuaded that neither on his part nor on the part of his family did there exist any sort of concealed suspicions as to herself. She did not intend to ask forgiveness for anything in the past, which fact she desired to be known. She did not consider herself to blame for anything that had happened in former years, and she thought that Gavrila Ardalionovitch should be informed as to the relations which had existed between herself and Totski during the last 5 years. If she accepted this money, it was not to be considered as indemnification for her misfortune as a young girl, which had not been in any degree her own fault, but merely as compensation for her ruined life. She became so excited and agitated during all these explanations and confessions that General Yepanchin was highly gratified, and considered the matter satisfactorily arranged once for all. But the once bitten Totski was twice shy, and looked for hidden snakes among the flowers. However, The special point to which the two friends particularly trusted to bring about their object, namely Gania's attractiveness for Nastasya Filippovna, stood out more and more prominently. The pourparlers had commenced, and gradually even Totski began to believe in the possibility of success. Before long Nastasia and Gania had talked the matter over. Very little was said, her modesty seemed to suffer under the infliction of discussing such a question. But she recognized his love, on the understanding that she bound herself to nothing whatever, and that she reserved the right to say no up to the very hour of the marriage ceremony. Gania was to have the same right of refusal at the last moment. It soon became clear to Gania, after scenes of wrath and quarrellings at the domestic hearth, that his family was seriously opposed to the match, and that Nastasia was aware of this fact was equally evident. She said nothing about it, though he daily expected her to do so. There were several rumours afloat before long, which upset Totski's equanimity a good deal, but we will not now stop to describe them, merely mentioning an instance or two. One was that Nastasia had entered into close and secret relations with the Yepanchin girls, a most unlikely rumour. Another was that Nastasia had long satisfied herself of the fact that Gania was merely marrying her for money, and that his nature was gloomy and greedy, impatient and selfish to an extraordinary degree, and that although he had been keen enough in his desire to achieve a conquest before, yet since the two friends had agreed to exploit his passion for their own purposes, it was clear enough that he had begun to consider the whole thing a nuisance and a nightmare. In his heart, passion and hate seemed to hold divided sway, and although he had at last given his consent to marry the woman, as he said, under the stress of circumstances, yet he promised himself that he would take it out of her after marriage. Nastasia seemed to Totski to have divined all this, and to be preparing something on her own account, which frightened him to such an extent that he did not dare communicate his views even to the general. But at times he would pluck up his courage and be full of hope and good spirits again, acting, in fact, as weak men do act in such circumstances. However, both the friends felt that the thing looked rosy indeed when one day Nastasia informed them that she would give her final answer on the evening of her birthday, which anniversary was due in a very short time. A strange rumour began to circulate meanwhile, no less than that the respectable and highly respected General Yepanchin was himself so fascinated by Nastasya Filippovna that his feeling for her amounted almost to passion. What he thought to gain by Gania's marriage to the girl it was difficult to imagine. Possibly he counted on Gania's complaisance, for Totski had long suspected that there existed some secret understanding between the general and his secretary. At all events, the fact was known that he had prepared a magnificent present of pearls for Nastasia's birthday, and that he was looking forward to the occasion when he should present his gift with the greatest excitement and impatience. The day before her birthday he was in a fever of agitation. Mrs. Yepanchin, long accustomed to her husband's infidelities, had heard of the pearls, and the rumour excited her liveliest curiosity and interest. The general remarked her suspicions, and felt that a grand explanation must shortly take place, which fact alarmed him much. This is the reason why he was so unwilling to take lunch, on the morning upon which we took up this narrative, with the rest of his family. Before the prince's arrival, he had made up his mind to plead business and cut the meal, which simply meant running away. He was particularly anxious that this one day should be passed, especially the evening, without unpleasantness between himself and his family. And just at the right moment the prince turned up. "As though heaven had sent him on purpose," said the general to himself, as he left the study to seek out the wife of his bosom. End of Part 1, Chapter 4. Recording by Martin Geeson in Haslemere, Surrey.